What is up, folks? Welcome back to the Repertoire podcast. This is another Repertoire report with myself, Justin Khanna, and then I have my co-host Ray DeLucci here with me. Ray, how are you today? I know you're a little under the weather, so I want to give that disclaimer for the listener if we have a little bit of a hiccupy, from your side on the story front. So give Ray a little bit of grace today.
Yeah, my little bit of congestion here. We got a storm that rolled in yesterday, so it's not doing the best. But I'm here anyway to record. I'll have some tea after this and probably go to bed.
The show must go on. Not to put you
Yes.
on the spot after that intro, but for those that again aren't familiar with the show, we bring industry news. Ray and I both gather some stories, and then we kind of go back and forth, get each other's takes on what's happening in the restaurant, chef, fine dining, even CPG side of things. I know that that's a particular interest of Ray's, and so unfortunately, we have to start off on a little bit of a somber note today. Ray, I know you brought this story explicitly, but I also wanted to talk about this today, so maybe you start us off.
Yeah. Fortunate news that celebrity chef Anne Burrell has passed away this week. Thought it would be a good just take a moment to recognize that, acknowledge that. Passed by the age of 55. Actually got to meet Chef Anne Burrell when I was at the CIA. She came for a demo or a conference, and she has had multiple appearances. Actually, was on the Culinary Institute of America's Facebook page today and shared a post because there's just so many examples of her being at the school and being recognized as someone who is influential in the industry. So yeah, it was just shocking. Obviously, it's sad for the industry. A chef who did a lot of work, obviously on the Food Network, but also outside of it as well. And so Eater, I'll give credit to Eater, Leanne Doss on Eater. Had a little bit of write up, and it kind of spoke to me a little bit just because I didn't really realize where she was from. Me being from Buffalo, New York. So apparently she was born in Casanova, New York, and native of the state. And this write-up shares that she was inspired by her mother's talent in the kitchen and her admiration for Julia Childs. She graduated from the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park, New York in 1996. She then spent a year in Italy attending the Italian Culinary Institute of Foreigners before returning to New York City to begin her career working as a sous chef alongside Lydia Bastianich at Felidia Ristorante. Burrell then furthered her career working in restaurants and teaching until the chef received her break. Appearing as a sous chef on Iron Chef America, she was later offered her own show, Secrets of a Restaurant Chef, which ran for 9 seasons and was nominated for an Emmy Award. Also wanted to quickly share that from myself, she studied English and communication at Canisius College in Buffalo. So I didn't realize her ties and roots back to the Western New York / upstate New York region. So all that to say, I was pretty shocked. My mom actually was the first one to let me know. Mouth dropped open, like just total disbelief. And obviously she's so young, but yeah, just obviously awful to see, and thoughts and prayers to her family. But just wanted to open with the recognition of someone who was impactful in the food world and someone we've lost, a chef we've lost this year. So any thoughts,
Yeah.
Justin?
No, I don't have any sort of personal connection. It was always this, like, growing up watching Food Network and seeing her on the big screen was kind of the only interaction, I would even call it, I had with her. She never did any sort of engagements at the CI when I was there, but it is this, figure that you see across multiple shows. Having longevity in food media is like just super impressive in general. And it is this, to your point, so young, 55 is just, taken too soon. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
to your point, I just wanted to make sure that we included, some acknowledgement there.
Yep.
It is not an easy transition to come off of, those types of stories, but
Yeah.
it is award season. And so I think that is something that everybody is kind of like up in arms about, whether it's going to the award ceremonies or crossing their fingers and holding their breath and hoping that their restaurant's name gets announced on stage. And so I have no shortage of just kind of like shout outs and announcements and just catch ups that I can do. I know that a lot of the listeners of this show are busy working professionals. And so if we can give you a little bit of like a roundup, so to speak, a digest of some of the awards that have dropped and maybe just some notable names that are either newcomers to the scene or just finally getting recognition or even getting snubbed. There's a couple of just insights across 3 of the big ones that dropped this week or that are going to be dropping this week. And so the first one is that the James Beard Awards happened yesterday, I believe, that 2 days ago, June 16th. And then they also have the media awards that dropped. The notable ones is Outstanding Chef went to Jung-Sik Kim of Jun-Sik in New York City. Recently earned 3 Michelin stars, and now it is this, kind of like layering on I'm noticing that across a couple of the Michelin recognitions, and then also now with James Beard. Outstanding hospitality went to Atomix in New York City. There's a This Place Called episode on my channel where I did a kind of going out to eat meal at that restaurant, and they just do not stop getting this national recognition, which I think is pretty awesome. Outstanding restaurateur went to Lee Hansen from the trio of French restaurants that they own. So it's Frenchette, Le Roc, and Le Veau d'Or in New York. And then we also have, I'm almost positive, Sema got #1 restaurant in New York from another list. And now its best chef New York State is Vijay Kumar from Sema. And so Indian cuisine is also having a little bit of a moment right now. And that restaurant in particular just seems to be getting all of the, attention. I'm not saying that it's not deserved. I had a really, really good meal there with a friend. He works in the Lower East Side. We ended up meeting there, and there's a little bit of like kind of giving people what they want. Like they play it, I'm going to call it relatively safe on the, kind of giving people what they crave on the Indian food side of things. But there's also an incredible intentionality in the way that they can just kind of like take something that is incredibly traditional and just plate it in a more modern way. And I think that's sometimes what people want. As I'm half Indian, I go back to India and have family ask me about Indian cuisine in the US. And they sometimes get frustrated that modern takes on Indian cuisine are not traditional enough or rooted enough in some of the more traditional either techniques or methods or recipes. And so I think that it's a hard needle to thread on the Indian cuisine side. And I think Sema is just doing it in a way where it is clearly like resonating with people. Obviously, there's people who are haters of Sema because of that rise in popularity and attention. But the other one that was notable, because it is a city that I'm starting to frequent a little bit more because I have family there, is Best New Restaurant went to Boucheron in Minneapolis, which I think was totally from the people who, friends of mine, I have like ex-coworkers who are working in Minneapolis. A lot of you listeners work in Minneapolis, and just even friends from Seattle who have like uprooted from here and moved to Minneapolis have been like Boucheron, Boucheron, Boucheron. And to see them, again, get some recognition in a city that, as we've discussed in this show before, does not have a Michelin guide. I think it's, the closest you can get to that kind of like national stage acknowledgement. And so any thoughts on the did you have any James Beard awards that you saw to be particularly notable?
Not really, no. It's been cool to see. It's kind of hard for me to track all this, not being in restaurants, and being very focused into Chicago. But no, what I'm interested in is those broader themes. Like for yourself, like what do you see a cuisine that's been dominant this year that maybe you were surprised? Is Indian that cuisine? Is that coming up or not really? Like,
I don't think. I mean, I think you see like Koreans having its heyday. I think that there's like I think the outstanding professional and cocktail service was this guy named Ignacio Jimenez from Super Bueno in New York. And I try to make it to New York at least once a year because one, it is just an exciting city. Two, there's a lot of my people are there. Like one of my best friends from culinary school is living there. A lot of the brands that we have worked with in the past are based out of New York. And so there's a lot of FaceTime that I get from being in New York. And it's still such an exciting city to eat in. And so I try to keep a little bit of boots on the ground. But to your point, it's very hard to be like really in the thick of things. And I have it for other reasons, right? Like I'm focusing more on family now. I also made it a point to call out, and I was doing a little bit of research on this, and like Eater wrote a whole piece about how Seattle got completely snubbed on James Beard this year. There was no, places that got, recognition from the, and I might be wrong on that, but it is, just notable that there's people who got nominated and there's people who went, but, Portland seems to still have a little bit of an edge on us, at least in the Pacific Northwest region. And so it's not that there aren't restaurants who are doing a good job. I just think that it is a little bit of a confluence of timing. It is a confluence of, the relationships you're building in James Beard land, as I've heard. There's a situation of, you go get asked to go cook at the James Beard house, or James Beard hosts an event at your restaurant. I've been to some of those events here in Seattle where James Beard is hosting with a particularly notable chef here in the city. And so, it's a little bit of a relationships game. Some people might call it politics, but I do think that it is one of the more updating level awards that happens in the industry in the sense that it is an annual thing, and they are pretty on top of, continuing to highlight a range of different places in a world where I think Michelin often gets touted for not being diverse enough, so to speak. And So no, I
Yeah.
don't think I see any sort of themes. I think that there's just like the people who are winning just keep on winning. That's basically tied into the fact that like it's not that people are getting James Beard awards and then they're not getting Michelin stars, or they're ending
Yeah.
up on the James Beard list, and they're not represented anywhere else. It is like you saw something drop 2 weeks ago on a restaurant, and now it's like, oh, it's such a no-brainer that they also got their James Beard.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to see. I'm looking at the Chicago list. I think there was 2 Chicago nominees who brought home awards. I know Kumiko was one for the outstanding bar. So it's interesting to see, obviously, with the the city of Chicago, with how many restaurants there's in that are in here. But to see a bar win was actually pretty interesting. I also went on this article that Eater had about just basically past Chicago James Beard winners, and there are just so many that I've been to: North Pond, Violet
Yeah.
Hour, and my favorite, Sunwall Barbecue. Um, so it's I saw some of the criticism too about James Beard. It's not as if they're picking bad restaurants per se. I mean, all those restaurants, like Sunwall is my favorite restaurant in the city. Um, if you've never been, it's one of the best like lunches or brunches you'll have, or dinners, depending on when you go. But yeah, and it's interesting to see. I'm just really more so interested also in the world's 50 best, and what that looks like over the next.
Well,
You said it drops tomorrow,
I'll touch
correct?
on that. I'll touch on that really quickly, and then I'll go over to you. I'll just wrap up all the award show season stuff that I've been kind of paying attention to. So we will have in the show notes the full world's 50 best list, because as the time of recording this on the 18th, the list drops on the 19th.
Yeah.
And so by the time you're listening to this, you will know who is the best restaurant in the world for 2025. What World's 50 Best does, for those that don't know, is they also release a 51 through 100 list as like a way to kind of get promo for the main list, as like a lead up. PR people pick it up and publications start to share the stories. And so you can see some of the restaurants that you probably have been following on this 51 through 100 list, which we'll also link in the show notes, just because it ends up being kind of nice that you can see more restaurants getting recognized. And then if you're kind of playing like a guess who game of, oh my goodness, I see this restaurant on 51 through 100, you kind of know that they're not going to be in the top 50. But it is kind of cool to also then track like, oh, who's new this year? Who is kind of like on the rise, went from 93 to 64. There's an interesting kind of like way to track some of those numbers over time and see, if you're thinking about changing jobs, you're just getting into the industry, or you're graduating culinary school and you're like thinking about what that fine dining restaurant's going to be, or that first place that you're going to go to, paying attention to that list and more importantly, the delta that you're starting to see that restaurants are displaying can sometimes be helpful. And yeah, I'm just best of luck to all of the folks who are in the running for tomorrow's list. And again, we will have it in the show notes to save you folks time. And then the last piece on the awards front is Michelin Guide dropped 2 guides since we last spoke, Ray. And I know there's one more Michelin story we want to cover, but just very high level, Scandinavia or the Nordic countries, their rankings all got dropped, as well as Germany. Scandinavia was like maybe a little bit less notable. There was no new 3-star places in Scandinavia, which, I haven't been to enough places to like be actually upset that maybe no new places have been awarded. There are 33 new restaurants that got added to the guide, 2 new 2-star places, 10 new 1-star places, and 5 new green stars. And there's a place in the Faroe Islands called Paz that is one of the new 2 stars. And then in Sweden, there's a restaurant called Signum, which is now a new 2 Michelin star restaurant. And then in Germany, they have 2 new 3-star restaurants. But the notable point that I wanted to kind of talk about here is Germany has now hit their all-time high number of total starred restaurants. And I think it's in the 200s. I think it's 230 something is the new record number of restaurants that they're able to flex. Yeah, I can maybe get that number exactly here. 341 Michelin starred restaurants in total is a new record, which is, believe it or not, more than Scandinavia's. 282 recommended restaurants. But then this says 341 Michelin starred restaurants is a new record for Germany. And so have not been to Germany to dine, but I think that there's just an interesting, like, I wouldn't have, if you would have asked me, are there more Michelin recognized restaurants in Germany or Scandinavia as a whole, which is made up of multiple countries, I would have probably said Scandinavia, but it's just an interesting factoid.
Yeah, I would have thought the same thing, but I guess the stats don't lie.
Go Germany. Go Germany. So yeah, what do you got?
Have you seen? Well, first, have you seen Eater's new rebrand? I noticed this week. I think it happened
No, I
last
have
week.
not. No, I have
Go on
not.
Eater's site real quick. It's very
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
It's I don't know.
Oh, interesting.
It's like
Yeah, so
lighter.
for the
Um,
listener, it's like there's a lot more like pop of red. It's almost like I'm getting like deli menu vibes.
mm-hmm. Yep.
If
And then
you're
it's
kind of seeing
very
that.
also like if you look at the stories, like it's not as much as like think pieces or articles as like food guides and whatnot.
Yep.
Um,
I mean, I
I forgot
use
the big
Eater in
site.
that way, to be honest. Like
Yeah.
as a, going to a new city or I'm revisiting a city that I haven't been in a while. Eater is one of those resources with their list of 38 restaurants as well as the new restaurants that they like to highlight. They just keep it up to date in a relatively recent fashion. And so none of their lists are really more than 6 months old, which is something that I use to try to rely on. Because it's like
Yeah.
if a restaurant had a particularly notable write up, those of us who have worked in restaurants know that the staffing situation changes drastically across 6 months. And
Yeah.
it's not to say that, if a chef leaves, it is an immediate red flag and you should not go eat at that restaurant. But it is like you kind of have this window where the team who got that accolade is still going to be in place. And you can probably have a higher likelihood of getting that type of experience if you decide to go visit.
Yeah.
And if, it's a year and a half old, the team is probably drastically different. And when that happens, as those of us who have worked in restaurants know, things change. Different people working stations, different management is now in place because the brigade had to shuffle around. And so that provides utility for me, certainly. But yeah, like even
Yeah.
seeing Eater's Guide to Tohoku, Japan's capital of sake, wagyu, and sea pineapples, is like on the front page now.
Yeah. It was interesting. I mean, I don't know. We'll see how it goes. It seems very much. It seems less. I say politically motivated, but more like less think piece article focused and more like guide to food around cities focused. So it'd be interesting to see. My story. Let's stay on
Yeah, I
ratings.
support
So
that.
I put up some. We did the podcast last week. I covered the story of the Michelin guide. Basically, Virginia saying no. Got some commentary on TikTok. It was like grifters. There was like the biggest, like scam ever sold. And then I had a very thoughtful comment from someone basically saying like, if Michelin guide purports himself to be a guide that goes and finds the best restaurants, then they shouldn't be limiting themselves to regions that will pay them to go. And if their guide is built on the prestigiousness of going to find the best restaurants, they should be able to go anywhere in the United States and find those restaurants, regardless of if a tourism board fee is, is what they're asking for. I thought it was very insightful to just like talk to people on it, and it seems like a lot of people have kind of soured on it or were soured on it. I'll read you the comments here. So the first one it says. So the first one says basically the stars are becoming more of a curse than a blessing to the restaurants that get them. Another person responded absurd to the news about Virginia, like saying no. And then this one person says it's still more merit based than the trivial popularity contest that is the James Beard Award nomination process, which is interesting, which consistently nominates superior restaurants in awards. Um, but just this idea of basically people feeling kind of jaded to the award system, but specifically to Michelin not like asking for money, therefore not going to places. So I wasn't expecting as strong of a reaction. I kind of thought there might be a couple people more so defending the practice of trying to, I guess, understand that, but there were, and I agree. I think if you're going to be the best guide in the world, like you should probably be able to go wherever. You shouldn't let the tourism board or lack of funding hold you back in a sense. But just wondering your thoughts because I know we touched on the story. Award season is kicking off. And I thought it would be a disservice not to kind of reference back to it for all those people listening or that commented.
Yeah, some of the people think that it is this one-sided thing from the sense of, unless they're greeted with a, what is that, like a cashier giant check when they, roll into the city in their limousine,
Yeah.
Michelin is just going to give you the middle finger and walk away and say, we're not going to cover you. there has, correct me if I'm wrong, been some coverage that certain cities and certain markets are, and this is using Michelin's words, not mature enough for a guide yet. And so the idea that it is this binary situation, I don't necessarily maybe buy into that. I think Michelin might send inspectors to individual cities to go have some meals. And because they're shrouded in this mystery, none of us will ever know. But I do think that it's not always that cut and dry of that. And then you take it on the other side and you say, well, Michelin knows what it's like to operate the business at quote unquote a loss. I wouldn't necessarily say that it is directly, if you don't pay us this, 6-figure lump sum over the course of 3 years, we know we're going to lose money on this. But I think what they have done is they have established some of these relationships that have set the status quo for how they want to operate going forward. And for the cities who have done it, I would just like to see the people who have these rebuttals and they're saying, it's lost its luster. They don't have the same credibility that they have used to have before. It's like, just let's maybe talk data, and then we can maybe talk anecdotal, qualitative measures here. But just start on quantitative, where it comes to people upping their performance, people having better business revenue maybe than previous years, the ability to open multiple locations. And what's interesting here is that there's certain cities that have kind of in recent memory never had to grapple with those problems. So like the San Franciscos, the Chicagos, and the New Yorks of the world, who have kind of always had that Michelin guide. Why are those some of the best cities for dining in the US? It is like, you can argue the other side and say there's lower cost of living, maybe there's better product in certain areas of the US, and people are going to go there and open their place and quote unquote have a better restaurant. But it is this funny thing where that's not the whole picture. Like, you also have to source talent. And what does talent want? You and I, coming out of culinary school, we wanted to say that we had worked in fine dining at a Michelin recognized place on our resume. And so those throwaway statements, like, I kind of want to get a sense of, like, have those people worked at Michelin restaurants? Have they ever had ambitions to have a Michelin starred restaurant of their own? And it's not like you need to have a Michelin star to have an opinion on this. But I do think that it is very, very easy to cast stones at Michelin for, again, the fact that by definition, not every single restaurant is going to get recognized by the guide. And so you have this problem where there's an asymmetry of, there's 1,500 restaurants in this city and only 100 have gotten recognized by Michelin, whether it's in the guide, Bib Gourmand, Star 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
I'm working on an episode of the Michelin Guide right now, and so all of this is like very top of mind for me. And it is this situation where Michelin has inserted themselves as another player in the market. So there's restaurants, there are guests, and now Michelin Guide is this kind of like middle person who does the evaluating, who does and it's like, it helps, in my opinion, speaking personally, I think it helps both parties. Are there instances where people get a Michelin star and you go and you have your meal and you have a bad night? Absolutely. And that, I think, is what spurs some of these people to have some of those comments, and they write off Michelin entirely, not understanding how it impacts like a restaurant community at large, or how it totally changes the game for a chef and actually breathes new life into their business. And then you have some of these stories of these chefs who have totally different reasons for maybe giving their stars back, or, opening in a place because there was no Michelin guide, and then all of a sudden, the attention caught up with them, and now all of a sudden they were like, no, I didn't want Michelin to be here, and now they're trying to give me stars. I think those are outlier cases, and that's what people use as like, see, here's the evidence that, Michelin stars are not, what they're all cracked up to be. And they completely ignore the giant stack of evidence behind, which is, this totally changes a city and allows for tons of opportunity, and people are making more money, and the dining culture is better, and all of these sorts of benefits that come from a Michelin guide being there. And so, again, I think the listener probably knows where I stand on some of this stuff. I just, of course, you can find evidence of some of the people that are commenting some of these things.
Yeah.
I just don't necessarily buy it. Or maybe the question I have is like, what's the alternative? Like if we're going to do away with the Michelin guide, what's going to take its place? And then you have this funny I think it's called Chesterson's fence problem, where two people walk up in a field and there's a fence there, and one person says we should rip this fence down, and the other person says, well, I don't necessarily know. Do we know why this fence is here in the first place? And it's like, if we totally undo with the Michelin guide, what's going to take its place, and is that going to be better? I don't necessarily know. And then just to really touch on the payment point really quickly, it's like those same people will also argue that, like XYZ needs to be more expensive, or they'll bash a chef when they close for poor business practices. And I just don't buy it. You know what I mean? Like clearly there is a market price for this, that they have had multiple market participants. And when I say that, I mean tourism boards come in and say, yes, we're willing to pay this, and we can see the ROI on this money being spent. It's not like they're raising the price incessantly and they're saying, cool, we got California to pay $300,000, where we're going to go to the South and we're going to try to get them to pay $1.5 million. And now we're going to raise it to $3 million for New York to have their guide. It is an investment play. It is, and in the grand scheme of things, we look at the P&Ls of some of these restaurants that are probably in the tens of millions of dollars when we aggregate them all together. And it's like, we paid $150,000 as a tourism board to get this recognition and this media stuff, and they're going to host the ceremony. Like, they host a ceremony now. You know what I mean? Like, it is not a situation where they just call you like they used to and say, hey, so-and-so, congratulations, you have just been awarded 2 Michelin stars. And then, you have the photo or the video of that chef crying on the phone. It is like a proper production now. And so to me, the game has changed a little bit, and Michelin is just kind of like adapting with the times. And there's too many benefits for me to I excuse some of the downsides. I am acknowledging that there are some, but I don't see them as being necessarily as bad as people claim to be, because those same people who make those statements also go on to YouTubers who are, doing sponsored content things. And they're like, this content should be free. You know what I mean? There's just this air of nothing should be paid. Do you know what I mean? And they don't have the ability to connect dollars to outcomes. And that's what kind of frustrates me. And I just sometimes get animated on it because, again, show me the alternative. If you can show me another method that works, I'm all ears. But I don't. It's working. Do you know what I mean? So why are we criticizing it in the same way? I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I don't know that I share all of the sentiment. I think the first thing I'll say is, I think the biggest issue, the biggest hole they've dug themselves, is not every city has had to pay for them to come. And I feel like they already had a broad enough appeal overseas that when they came to America, they should have just either charged or not charged. So there's a classism. There's already a classism rebuttal against Michelin by dining unaffordable food for the average person. So that when I do think it's a bad look, or I can see how it's a bad look. If you're going to a southern state, for example, and you're like, Virginia, you need to pay us, but we didn't charge New York or Chicago or LA, but you're a southern state, you need to pay us. So I definitely see why someone would feel that way. I would also share, this person DM'd me this response, so I'm not going to share their name. You'll know who you are when you said it. I thought this was the most level-headed response. The Michelin Guide should have never tied itself to specific areas or cities. And this is what I want to ask you. If the best restaurant in the world isn't in a downtown metropolitan area, does that mean it's not worth reviewing? I understand that it is impossible to thoroughly review every restaurant in the world, but it seems like they're intentionally skipping out on hidden gems just because the money isn't there. And I actually do kind of wonder, what if the guide was broken out, wasn't as specific to a city? And then I also, the counter argument, well, then what's the point of the guide? Is it just America, or is it a guide for a city? And I don't think it's all in Michelin. I think it's also the culture that it breeds within chefs and how they look at it. But I think the bigger picture and the big hole they dug is that because they didn't charge every market they went into, it looks bad now if they want to go into a market, or they offer to be paid to go into a market, and that market says no. And the chefs kind of have this rebellious phase. There were some chefs I quoted in the last article where it was F it. If they're not going to come check out our food because we won't pay them, then F it. It's this kind of anti-establishment stuff, which people in the restaurant industry love. We are anti-establishment. We are anti, a normal job or whatnot. So it's a really interesting dynamic where there is the one hand, the accolades, the awards, the money, what it can do to change a restaurant's business. But then there's also obviously the others where they become so establishment that it's screw Michelin. So that's kind of my thoughts on it. It's the flip of the coin on any given day on how I feel about it. I see the value in it, but I also can see some of the issues or errors that I think has gone well. But I also will say that I'm very interested in your video because maybe there's some misconceptions I have that you clear out. So I'm interested to see your work on it.
Just to touch on some of the points that you made, and I'm really trying to get the facts straight, not because I'm trying to push back too hard, but I really Miami and Orlando, like when the guide went to Florida, they also had to pay. And so I don't buy the, necessarily like there's a classism problem here. Michelin talks about it in the sense of mature dining cities, which again more aligns with this narrative that I am following more closely, or I guess I buy it more, that it is an investment into a city or an investment into an area, as maybe, hey, this dining city doesn't quite have restaurants that are 2 Michelin star, 3 Michelin star. And you see that when the guides get released in some of these new areas and they don't have a 3 Michelin star. Some of them don't even have a 2 Michelin star restaurant their first year being published.
And I share that in the podcast. Like, even if you pay, it's not guaranteed that you'll even get a star.
And then here's another alternative for people to think about. There is a split timeline here where Michelin decided we're going to charge restaurants. We're going to go to individual restaurants, and it's like, hey, if you want to be considered for the guide, you need to pay us. And so what they've done here in a really kind of like impressive way is said, who is the other participant in the market here who also benefits from us being in this city? The tourism board. Let's go to those organizations and let's have them fund, because they already have a budget where they're saying we need to invest. And this happens in all sorts of ways in the city. Building open air markets, or investing in a night market project. They already have budget that they're trying to spend. And so they have the data to back up one of the highest ROI spends of your money is to have Michelin come to the city. And again, Michelin is very discerning in saying, yes, no, you are not quite ready yet. Like, we want to wait a few years. We want to, maybe do some of this other investment into, surrounding areas, or you're going to go and decide to be a hidden gem. It's like maybe in a couple years where that's how it just naturally happens in the dynamic of the restaurant ecosystem. Restaurant does really well in this really remote area. People go work there. They develop their skills. They leave. They open places relatively nearby. And now, before you know it, like, that's the story of Copenhagen. That's the story of Napa. That's just, I can point to countless examples of this ultimately playing out. And then again, you can see the total outrage of people saying, it is crazy that the Michelin Guide is charging every restaurant $20,000. These are businesses that are already notoriously, slim margins, and it's extortion that Michelin is doing this. And so it's like, again, show me the alternative. They have threaded the needle incredibly well by saying we're going to have the tourism board foot this bill. And then also to the point on we can have hidden gem stuff. It's like California, the whole state of California has a guide now. And so like with these regional guides, it's like we're moving closer to a place where there is not going to be a single area of the U.S. that is not represented in the Michelin Guide. And then it's like that excuse completely goes to zero. So like directionally, we're going in the way that these people who say, well, I just want to have a backwoods restaurant in, West Virginia, or I want to be in New Mexico, or I want to be in the desert of, Nevada, and that's where I want my restaurant to be. It's like you're complaining and saying, well, it's bullshit that, the Michelin Guide is not going to come recognize me because I'm not near a metropolitan area. It's like this stuff takes time, and we are getting closer to that being a thing. One of the more notable examples of that is like Thomas Keller got the Michelin Guide to come up to Yountville. Like, they had a San Francisco guide, and because he was notable and it was relatively close enough to San Francisco, they were willing to, again, at that time, I would probably call it make an exception. Do you know what I mean? Because it was not in downtown San Francisco. It's akin to Little Washington for DC. Yes.
I will say
it's just all of these examples, I just don't buy it. Like, there's too many counter examples that the evidence is just too strong in the other way. And again, that's what I hope to cover in some of this content that I'm making. And so, just like, I don't mind the comments. Like give the comments, because I want to clear some of this up. And again, I just see the guide as being too net positive, not saying there's not downsides, not saying there's not negatives, but in general, in total, net, I think we come out ahead as an industry when the Michelin is like doing what they're doing and investing in cities.
I'll leave it at this. The Virginia case specifically, why I think it was so, I would say why there was so much criticism. I actually, Virginia chef I know, he felt a little burned by it because the rate they had offered to be paid was lower than other states. And there was kind of shade thrown at Virginia there was kind of a lack of culinary maturity.
Yes.
Virginia, the state, wasn't deemed culinary mature. And the chef was like, we literally have a restaurant in our state which you accepted because, so like, the Virginia one, like Boston came and went. When I heard like the it's like the kind of the issues with it. Virginia seemed a lot louder. So I appreciate you digging into it, and yeah, it'd be
No,
interesting to see
and I'm
what
speaking
you
at this.
share.
I'm speaking from this in a way of like kind of being pissed. Like I'm kind of annoyed
Yeah,
that Seattle still doesn't have a Michelin guide yet. I'm not saying that there's like a gajillion restaurants here that are worthy of stars yet. I also would argue that there is like we have a couple of our fine dining places, and there's a swath of great casual places. And yeah, I sometimes get upset that like you guys are complaining that at least you're getting the opportunity to have a Michelin guide and you're turning it down, or you're,
yeah,
snubbing it in some way, shape, or form. I'm like,
yeah,
I would just love that we even consider it. You know what I mean? Because to the point of some of these contracts, they're 1 year long, 3 years long in length. Those are written in that way so that they can be renegotiated when the time
yeah,
comes. And it's like, hey, our expenses have changed, or like, hey, you guys are totally mature. And then to the guide's history, of course, New York is not going to need to pay for their Michelin guide. Like it's mature enough.
hmm
Michelin does not need to invest in. Hey, we need to be really up on making sure we're like paying attention to the newcomers. We're revisiting places who we had a good experience at to make sure there's consistency there, which is one of the values
yeah.
that they decide to factor in. So yeah, I could go on for ages on this. Is it my is it my turn or your turn? I've kind of lost track here.
Your turn. Your
Okay,
turn.
cool. So another acclaimed fine dining chef named Daniel Patterson has a new restaurant in the works in LA. And it's called, I'm going to say Jaca, but it might be Jaca, Jaca. And he has called it, well, I should maybe back up. It's been delayed. So Jaca restaurant, I'm going to call it Jaca from the sense of this story. Excuse my pronunciation if I'm totally off here. He says on Instagram, Restaurant Jaca is running so far behind, so I started to do a small pop-up series throughout the summer. Friday and Saturday nights only, 12 people per night, tasting menu including wines, and he's pricing it at $250 per person. And he's saying,
Okay.
think of it like an evolution of Kwa, which was another restaurant that he was
His
a part
first
of
restaurant. Great cookbook,
Yep.
by the way.
Yeah. Or a preview of Jaca. It will live in the space between places, which is a good place from which to create. Mostly, I just want to start cooking again. I miss it. And so from a structural perspective, they're saying it's going to be 8+ courses and wine, 10 to 12 seats a night. The dinner will be communal. You will have some wine and snacks when you arrive. You will meet new people, sit down and eat together. And then he goes on a little bit of a rant saying, like, now more than ever, we need to build a connection with each other. I'm calling it a
Yeah.
Jaca social club. It's not a restaurant, not formal, but a warm, welcoming place to enjoy good cooking and the company of other wonderful people. And so as someone who is like, I have not opened my own restaurant, but I've been a part of restaurant openings, some of these delays, especially with the environment in LA, having just had the fires happen, I know of other chefs who were slated to open places and they have just like either completely canceled the project or they are looking at like
Yeah.
2 years, 3 years out from now until their project can be built because contractors are just busy. Like we're rebuilding entire communities here. And so there's a little bit of that factored in. But also during that time, when you cannot be in your space until the health department comes and certifies that you actually can do food production, the build out from an architectural standpoint involving plumbing and electrical and all these sorts of things make it so that you're kind of just sitting on your hands as a chef. I remember I was on the opening team of this restaurant in Chicago, and just to give us employees who were waiting for the restaurant to open work so we could have work, we all went in the basement and like scraped paint off the ceiling of the basement because we were trying to turn it into like the employee area where the walk-in also was. And so we were kind of doing anything to like keep busy and doing all these things. And, the chef was doing R&D testing on the side. And I kind of think about it in this interesting way of this is the smart way if you have this moment of you're sitting on your hands and you're waiting for your restaurant to open to engage with the market that you're ultimately going to open in. Because sure, it may or may not be profitable at $250 a head with wine. Like it depends on what wine they're serving. It depends on what's on the menu. It depends on how much they're having to pay for the space that they're cooking out of. It depends on how much they're staffing this whole thing. But if anything else, this is incredible marketing in a way that I think pop-ups have turned into this thing where it was almost like an alternative to a restaurant. People saw it as like, well, I don't want to have this heavy infrastructure as a chef and I don't want to pay for all of this rigmarole. And so I'm going to do pop-ups instead. And I think we've kind of lost this idea of like, well, in order to hype up the opening, and it's not to say that Daniel Patterson's like a novel person for doing this. Other people do this all the time. But I think at that price point, at this, regularity, is in this kind of like intelligent way, right? So like you'll often see
Yep.
pop-ups being like, we're on Mondays and Tuesdays, or we're on a Sunday. This is like, nope, on the days when you would normally go out to eat, which is Friday, Saturday. Instead of going to XYZ restaurant down the street, come visit us instead. And you're going to have
Yeah.
this really, really incredible experience. And it's, again, going to be a preview of what's to come with this new restaurant. Like, that's how you start to build your list of regulars. You basically make it so that when it is time to open, you're just going to, have this list of engaged people already. And I wanted to note it as something for people to kind of like, it has been this, do I do pop-ups or do I do a restaurant? It's like you don't hear that many stories of people ultimately doing both. And I've written
Yeah.
this story on chef side quests, which I think we'll also maybe link in the show notes. And this is like, again, an example of maybe arguably like the more traditional path of getting people amped about this brand. And especially with Daniel Patterson, like having this
Yeah.
little bit
Yeah.
of a being in limbo and then being engaged again. I'm just excited to see what happens with it.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting. This idea of, it's a tales of this time. You go to open a restaurant. It takes longer than expected to be able to build revenue, to be able to build customer generation. I think it's really interesting, and I think
Yep.
there's a lot of opportunity, like you said, to build out that clientele base and kind of play around. And it's a great moment for them to test. This could be fine dining restaurants may look at this as the blueprint for opening if they're going to expand into a new restaurant, because what he can do now smartly is test out meals or test out ideas or concepts, and those that don't work don't have to necessarily affect the bottom line or the performance of the actual restaurant. They just affect his performance in his pop-up. So it actually is kind of like a little bit of an R&D testing space that can be really smartly used as a business tool. So that's how I see it.
Yeah,
At least.
it makes those first 3 months a little bit less rocky. It makes those first 3 months a little bit less rocky, right? Like it makes it so
Mm-hmm.
that when you're in those first 3 months and you're wanting to change the menu all the time, you can kind of get all of those creative juices out during this pop-up time. And then when you do open, it's like, no, this is what we know works. This is what's representative of the cooking we want to do here. And then you just roll forward with that. And then you just know people are happy with it because you have enough examples throughout the pop-ups to say, no, we know this works.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you got?
Definitely. This will be my last story. I did want to quickly share on the CPG front that a lot of companies like Nestle, or sorry, a lot of companies in general are bringing out are trying to remove food dyes from their products. I would just do a quick Google search: food companies removing food dyes. There's a bunch of them popping up. It's in Food Journal here that I get every day, so I would just look into that. But I think something really big happened in June that not many in the food industry have talked about. Um, this is the one story I forgot to mention to you before we started, but it's one that I think is incredibly important, and that is the fact that JBS went public on the United States Stock Exchange. Uh, JBS is a Brazilian meat giant. It is one of the biggest meat producers in the world, and the United States is the biggest market. It's based out of Brazil. I read a book earlier this year that I would highly recommend anyone who's interested in the food industry or whatnot. It's called Raw Deal by Chloe Sorvino. It goes into the kind of how the big meat industry has kind of been corrupted by politicians, by international organizations. It also she does a very good job going into how processed or artificial meat isn't necessarily the best answer moving forward. And I thought that part was interesting. But in this, she marks and she tracks the scandals of JBS, this giant meat packing company based out of Brazil, bribery charges, corruption charges, the owner slash sons of the owner escaping jail time. Giant company which is very like full of scandals. And I had seen a TikTok, funny enough, from a farmer basically saying that he's really worried about this. And so I went and did some research. So this is from CNBC. So JBS debuted on the stock exchange earlier this month. And when they debuted, shares of the scandal-plagued Brazilian meat giant rose actually in its public debut. So basically, CNBC goes on to say that the opening trade of $13.65 per share values the company at roughly $30 billion, outstripping rival Tyson's food market cap of $19.82 billion. Just to give a perspective, their value is that much higher than Tyson's. And they end up with a slight gain. Last year, the company reported a net revenue of $77.2 billion and a net income of $2 billion, according to regulatory filings. They operate worldwide, but the biggest divisions are obviously Brazil, U.S., and Australia. They own more than 80% of Pilgrim's Pride, which is the U.S. poultry giant. And this listing it's taken them 15 years to get to the stock market. They first announced plans in 2009, and then late in 2016, the company said it would have a U.S. IPO. But months later, the Brazilian government began investigating corruption into the meatpacking company, including its top executives. So what happened? They recently in October, they were fined. The Brazilian government fined JBS for buying cattle that were allegedly illegally raised in protected land in the Amazon. And they just have a whole history of corruption. The reason why farmers here are worried about it is their ability to purchase, their ability to go ahead and like own and take over land. So they already control a huge share of the beef processing market. I think it's like every 1 in 5 chicken or cow that you eat from is from JBS. Just
Wow.
perspective. This idea of vertical integration, foreign influence on the supply chain, and the profit pressure of now being a publicly traded company. There's worry that they're going to shortchange producers that they rely on in the U.S. They're going to buy up more land, putting independent ranchers out of business, and that we're eventually going to get to a large meat, maybe not monopoly, but close to it. And so there's just a lot of concern. And then Bloomberg was sharing this as well. They're eyeing more power around their U.S. grocery shelves, and they're saying that these shares could get the store, like their presence in grocery stores could get even bigger. They've spent 2 decades just really like crushing rivals, going into different markets. And just to give you perspective, since 2006, the sales of their company of beef and meat and chicken have grown 40-fold. So it's just a giant deal. It's a huge impact into like where the meat industry is. And you may be wondering why this was allowed. They basically donated to the Trump campaign, and the thought is the reason why. Can't say for sure. That's all hearsay. It's all speculation. I say allegedly, very, very strongly on this. But they finally got to IPO, and I think it's a terrible, terrible decision. I think it's one that is going to be very, very destructive to independent cattle farmers in the United States. And yeah, your thoughts?
I had no idea this company existed, and this funny, like, again, I mean, there are these like either umbrella companies or, the people actually behind the scenes, or I even will sometimes when I'm researching a company to see how big are they, you cannot always get their revenue because they're either owned by or, they're doing business as another entity. And so just hearing about this as an organization is crazy because, it is the largest meat processing enterprise in the world. But then even when you were sharing some of those numbers, it's like you're making $2 billion off of $77.2 billion in revenue. That's less than 3% profit on this business. And, it's not to say that we need to shed a tear for JBS here, but I do think that there's this interesting thing that happens when any company basically gets publicly listed is that there's increased scrutiny. They have to go through more regulatory, hurdles sometimes. And, to your point, the example going the other way is it gives you the ability to, either sell your own stock and now, make some briberies because now you're, you have a little bit of additional, money available because, your stock price just went from, I think in March it was at $30. And then in April it spiked to like almost $50. And so, what are some of the implications of that? And having not been a meat processor or a farmer, I think it's difficult maybe for me to weigh in on this. But I do think that it is, maybe we just need to keep an eye on this and just see how it. I question myself, like, how many times have I bought protein in some way, shape, or form, not knowing that it, has had this. You trace the trail back, and it goes all the way to this
Justin,
company.
You no doubt have bought it. I've bought it.
I'm not even saying for my personal consumption. I may be saying for like a pop up that I've done. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Like, have I inadvertently sold JBS products in some way, shape, or form? Because it is, again, this like buried behind layers of liability protection and
The
international
fact
trade. And
the fact that they were allowed to be just publicly traded is what blows my mind. I mean, what they've done to acquire power in the meatpacking industry is insane. Just they were literally indicted on a bribery scheme that was worth like $150 million. And it
wow.
involved like thousands of officials across Brazil.
Yeah.
It's an interesting time.
Did you do that as like a segue with the food dye story, or was that just maybe just a quick update on the food dye and then you transitioned to JBS? I just want to make sure we don't lose that story. You covering that?
Yeah, no, that was just a quick go look at what's going
Yeah,
on
I
with.
got it.
It's very important. But yeah, when we lost the connection, yeah, that was the last story I had.
Okay, got
And
it.
I don't know if you've ever like looked into Bloomberg, but they have some pretty. If anyone on here wants to like see some pretty incredible reporting, in my opinion, on like just the business of food and how like they had a really interesting by the numbers. So they went into like Japan's estimated tariff rate for rice. They talked about shrinking fish populations. Just a bunch of like quick bites that I think are important if you want to be knowledgeable in the food industry. So definitely something I would suggest looking at.
Okay, so my last story involves a chef out of France, and his name is Oliver Vincent, and he is the chef and manager of this restaurant called Lilot, Lilot. It is a 20-seat restaurant in Amboise, and they have instituted a policy at the restaurant where they say, quote, "From now on, if you do not come with the number of guests for which you reserved, you will be charged 15 euros per missing or additional person. Thank you for your understanding." And the chef owner, Oliver, has said in response to some of the criticism there, quote, "We're here because we need to make people responsible." He also says, "If we are here, it is to work. It is not to have tables, not to have customers. We organize ourselves so that everything is serene. We have staff. We work with fresh products. We do not pay employees and suppliers with monopoly money. My restaurant is a business." And so he basically has this policy that says, and he literally quotes this. He says, "Customers have their phones on them 24/7, and they only need to call and say we will be less, we will be more, or that we are not coming." And I just think it's a fascinating, again, rebuttal to some people in the comments of this when the news broke. And then it was this kind of meta story where the news broke and then this other publication came in and took the comments from the original piece of news and then wrote their article, including the comments to like add additional content and outrage people maybe a little bit more. That we will on one hand say, man, it sucks that restaurants have such a hard time. And then also it is like outrageous that, you can book for 6 people and then you only show up with 4. And for those of us that worked in restaurants, it drastically matters what the size of the table is because you sometimes can't go in one direction or the other without completely effing up the dining room. Where it's like, maybe we were 4 and now we want to be 6. It's like, hey, we had a 4 top for you. Like we can't really, necessarily like grab a 2 top and pull up 2 extra chairs, and guests or sometimes people who have maybe not worked in restaurants, unexperienced guests maybe not know that is the case. And that is like just the reality of especially a 20-seat restaurant, dude. Like think of it from a numbers perspective. If we have 20 seats and 2 people go, not showing up, that's 10% of the dining, you know what I mean? The revenue that we were expecting from that night. And it's just not going to happen. I have been at places, and again, I had a policy where I had to cancel a restaurant reservation in Copenhagen. And I went to the restaurant in person to basically say, hey, I'm so sorry. I can't make the meal. I know you guys have a policy on this. And so if there's a situation where you need me to pay, you know what I mean? Like, I totally want to make sure that I'm honoring that. And that is typically, like, that is sometimes done in this age of, like, talk and prepaid reservations and taking deposits for things. Restaurants will just charge you the cost of the meal because it is like, hey, no, we are not going to fill this seat. We were expecting this revenue. We prepped for this. I staffed for this. It is a, vacant piece of dining room real estate in my restaurant tonight. And so to hear that he's only going to charge 15 euros per missing or additional person. And again, he like has it up to basically the time of the reservation. You can just give them a call and just say, hey, we're going to be a different number of people. I just think it was interesting to see the outrage on it when I really don't think that this is that drastic of a policy. If you're like constantly getting no-shows or constantly getting like thrown around by your guests and you're working in this mentality of like, well, the customer is always right. I can't tell people no. This is an example of, I think, a very reasonable middle ground of putting your foot down and saying, this is what my business needs. And I think that again, having it as a rule or a policy or however you want to word it, ultimately might hurt when you're going through the transitionary time of we didn't used to enforce this and now we are. But now, in perpetuity into the future, this team probably has like either a ton of confidence that this small little fee is going to cause people to either be more transparent with us and actually communicate to the restaurant, or it's at least going to cover the fact that like I had to prep for this thing and, it's just a vacant seat in our restaurant and we're not going to maybe get the 60 euros that we were going to get had those, people actually come, but at least it's going to at least soften the blow a little bit from a revenue perspective for the restaurant. So I don't know. Do you have thoughts on this as a new policy? And it's not even a new policy, but just like the combination of them dropping this, their reasoning behind it, and then maybe the outrage in this. It's 2025 and we're still having these conversations is mind blowing to me.
I'm all for it. I have no rebuttal. I think it's great. Put it in perspective. It's $17 for extra seat in US dollars. Like, this is not a no-brainer. I would say, like, for those against it, like, look at Talk. Some restaurants in the United States, especially 3 Michelin star restaurants, will have a day or a 12-hour window where if you cancel, you're charged a much steeper fee. So to have a $17 fee, like, yeah, I mean, this goes back to the idea of, like, the general community not understanding restaurants. Restaurants need to fill their seats, especially if you're a 20-seat restaurant. You need to have your seats filled. You're depending on those seats being filled. You're depending on their revenue from coming in. And if a party books those seats and 2 out of 5 don't show up, that is a giant percentage of sales for a 20-seat restaurant. So I'm all for this. I think that so many people that just don't get the dynamics and how small the profit margins in restaurants are. It's the fact that people like this don't like that will complain about that don't truly understand that a restaurant is just looking out for their best interests. And at the same time, a lot of those people will be like, well, why don't we pay restaurant workers more? Why? And on top of that, this restaurant's probably not charging as much as they probably should be for the food they're doing. It's like, yeah, this is the dynamics of a restaurant in 2025. And I think more chefs like him need to be taking a firmer stance on cancellations. Do I get annoyed at a 24-hour cancellation? I do. I think that that's a little aggressive. I would say I think 12 hours is a sweet spot because things happen during the day. You can at least open that up, especially if you're a restaurant. If you're a restaurant charging that, you're probably high in demand anyway. But yeah, $17 for someone that doesn't show up on the reservation, you have every opportunity to cancel it. I'm all for it. And I think anyone complaining just doesn't really understand the food industry.
And just putting it into perspective on like if we were to have a spectrum of you buy the ticket for this experience and there's absolutely no refund policy. And then I think what people have gotten used to, which I would even argue is like in the negative for restaurants. If you remember, there were stories of people making reservations where they were going out as a party of 6 and there was maybe a host for the party, like the lead reservationer person who was going to make all the bookings. And they would make 3 or 4 separate 6-top reservations. And they would just leave it up to chance and just say, hey, what are we feeling on this particular night? And we'll just go to the restaurant that's either the closest to us when we're doing our bar crawl or whichever food we're most in the mood for. And I'll just no-show at all of the other 6-top restaurant reservations that I've made. Like the fact that that was a actual possibility for people to do. And like that is so far on the other end of this spectrum. And so it's like, to me, we're just getting into a more reasonable level of normalcy for some of these policies. And again, I don't see the craziness and the hype. And so I guess curious maybe for the listener, if you have a policy that is particularly working, or you maybe have a cool story on, we used to not have this policy and since instituting it, we've been able to make any of these changes. If you want to talk about the numbers, I think that would be something that I think Ray and I would get excited to hear about. And then I think it's also, some of this is, how much debate did this chef manager have to go through before making this policy? And now we're seeing all this backlash. I just want to like support it more. And I want it to be something that people don't feel like they're going to get canceled on the internet for instituting this stuff. And obviously it's easier if you start from day one with some of these policies. You don't have to walk things back because that's always hard with customers where you promise something, or it used to be really easy for me to just not show up at this table and now I'm getting charged. Of course, that's going to feel like it stings. But yeah, if you have a story like that, please reach out to us in a DM or hello@joinrepertoire.com, and we'll maybe have you on the show for a quick segment.
Yeah, definitely. Before we head out of here, Justin, I kind of had a quick idea. I've talked to some people before, and I think it's interesting to share kind of what we're both looking at outside of food. Since we meet on a bi-weekly cadence, So I'm just wondering if off the top of your head, do you have anything you're really interested in the food, but it could not be?
I am really getting back into my racket sports lately. I do it in a very kind of like organized way because, again, with less disposable time on my hands, it's a little bit harder to just like on a whim go play. But between pickleball and tennis, I am in a tennis league, but I did one through the winter. I did one in the spring. I'm now in another summer one. And so I'm playing a lot, which has been really, really awesome. And then I have just a couple of people, just friends of mine here in Seattle, who are doing a lot of pickleball. And it seems so exorbitant, but I bought like $120 pickleball paddle, which is like nuts. That I say that out loud, and that's like crazy. But that I actually notice a difference between like the cheap one my wife and I had from Costco and this new one that is made with like it's like some sort of like carbon fiber. What's the other one that is the material that like the military uses in like bulletproof vests? Like that's what's made
Kevlar.
yeah, Kevlar. There's
Mm-hmm.
Kevlar in my pickleball paddle, which is wild to me. But I notice it,
Damn.
and I am getting pretty reasonably good. I haven't lost a match in quite a long time, and so yeah, that's just like a very nice way to just like be outside. You and I both sit at our desks for our work, in a lot of respects, and so there's a little bit of that that's just been very engaging. And again, it
Yeah.
is connecting with people and being physical, and again, it aligns with taking care of my health a little bit more. And so that's kind of like, I obviously have some other things. I just went to both the conference at MAD, and then I also went to this conference in Boise, which was more of like a creator economy type of conference. And I just
Okay.
start to think about things like, like is there a book I want to write on the like specifically thinking about total station domination, and those sorts of ideas are like percolating in my brain. That again, it's like it feels very daunting. It is this thing that, but I do spend time on it, to be honest. Like outside of producing the show and some of the other content and the work that I do with the chefs one-on-one that I work with, it is something where I'm kind of like, that's kind of interesting. Like Total Station Domination is a program, it's a course, but
Yeah.
it's like there could be a book version of this. And I think
Yep.
any of these opportunities, you probably had the same thing when you're producing media. It's kind of like there's a little bit of imposter syndrome, certainly. There's a little bit of like, oh man, I never saw myself as like either a writer or someone who's going to have a book. But, it's something that's top of mind. I haven't really necessarily shared this. So I'm grateful that you're asking these, again, more personal questions. But yeah,
Yeah.
and then all the other normal stuff of just like enjoying spending time with my son and my wife and getting a little bit of travel in over the summer. It's a little bit harder than it used to be, but yeah, those are kind of like the three main things that I'm thinking about. What about you?
Really, farmers market's back.
Yeah.
Where I'm at. So, got some really good Parmesan, rosemary focaccia last week. There's strawberries, cherries. There's actually a person I can't remember his name. He's a mushroom farmer. I've gone to the last 2 years. He has these incredible mushrooms. He's not there this year. I don't know where he went.
Mm,
I don't know if he's just not coming this year, but I'm a little bummed about that. Um, Beyond that, watch the NHL playoffs. Florida won. I was rooting for the Oilers just because I want McDavid to get his first cup. Um, and then yeah, just been doing a lot of writing. But beyond that, I've been really into fantasy books lately. I've been a strict nonfiction reader for like 8 years now, even in college, like more than that. Um, but then the last month, I've gotten into fantasy. I read the Buffalo Hunter, which is like a historical fiction horror book, which I highly recommend. And then I recently read Dungeon Crawler Carl. It's a popular book on Book Talk. If you're on Book Talk, you know about it. One of the most interesting and engaging and fun books I've read. If you've ever played a video game, you'll read it and know why, but highly recommend. So if you're looking for some a medium or something fun to read outside of work, Dungeon Crawler Carl is my recommendation. It's been pretty popular for a while now, so I'm not breaking any new ground for any avid readers. But if you've never heard of it, I recommend it.
my wife and I, actually, to your point on the farmers market thing, we signed up for our favorite stone fruit farm in our area, which is called Collins Family Orchard, I think is what they're technically called. We signed up for their
Okay.
CSA this summer. One, because like my son and most parents will probably empathize with this a little bit, like becomes a fruit fiend in the summer, and it's just like buy a pint of raspberries and it's like gone before we even get to the
Oh,
car from
dude,
the
I
from the
I
store.
can I eat a whole watermelon a
Yeah,
day.
yeah,
Like,
totally. And so I'm a little bit interested to see like we're getting like pounds and pounds and pounds of stone fruit this summer, which I'm like pumped on, but I'm also kind of curious. I'm like, are we gonna have overload and I'm gonna be like sick of peaches and plums? Because right now we like cannot get enough of them. And I feel like I buy 8 pounds and they're like gone in 2 days. And so I think we're at this like crazy exorbitant level of produce that we're going to be having, but it's tight to be able to like have such high quality stuff and then like get it on subscription is amazing. So, support your local CSA if you aren't already doing so.
Heard. Before we end out of here, if you're listening on YouTube, a like, a subscribe, a share always helps. If you're on podcast, a follow and a share, depending on what platform you're on.
And rate the show. It on Spotify is super, super, super easy to rate the show. It is like 2 clicks to give us a rating of your choice, good or bad. I don't care. I want to see the feedback if it's bad. And again, you don't have to type out a whole diatribe to us. We just genuinely, if you're enjoying the show, that means there's probably also other folks who are going to enjoy the show. And a rating really, really goes a long way for a small show like this. So really, really appreciate it if you end up doing so.
Heard. Sounds good.
Cool.
Thanks, man.
Thanks.